So how many of you would agree with me when I say that the quality of your life depends on your capacity to give and receive love? You can wave your hand in front of the camera if you've got it going on. Personally, I think love is going to be the determining factor in whether we survive as a species, including ultimately whether we take the whole planet down with us. I'm going to start tonight by defining love, because this definition is going to be the foundation of everything I talk about. Love is human connection. Connection's an embodied experience involving all of your senses. It happens when you see yourself being seen, hear yourself being heard, and feel yourself being felt. Because it's a full sensory experience, you won't feel it if you're in any way armored up or defended. Connection is only experienced when you're vulnerable and real. Love is the foundation of our experience. Love is how we begin, and love is what matters most at the end of life. It's how we evaluate our lives according to love given and love received. We're at our very best when we feel loved and connected. There's a massive body of research that shows we're happier, healthier, and live longer when we have strong relationships. One of the best known of these is the Harvard longitudinal study. If you're interested in research and studies, and I highly recommend this one, check out Robert Waldinger's really excellent TED Talk on it. This particular study took a group of Harvard students and a group of working class men. It was all men at that time, back in the day, and decided to study every aspect of their lives going forward. The study began in 1938. There's still about 60 of the original 700 participants alive, and it's expanded to their children and generations subsequent as well. What they expected to find in this study is that Harvard graduates would do better. They'd be more successful, which would lead to better life outcomes. What they found is that the only predictor of better outcomes was whether a person had strong relationships. And this is across the board, including physical health and lifespan. We're at our best when we're living a connected life, surrounded by people we love and care about. And this impacts every aspect of a person's life. 300,000 years of human evolution is behind this. If you don't belong, you don't survive. We are wired for love and connection. If we're missing that, we suffer. So your life does depend on love in every aspect. Love is front and center in the beginning and the end powerfully. What happens in the middle? In the middle, this is where we make a bit of a mess of the whole thing, particularly in our romantic relationships. Dwayne came up with this metaphor recently, and this is part of my adding humor to this talk tonight. I think it's really good, a little bit of black humor. Have you ever seen one of those nature programs on sea turtles hatching and leaving their nests and trying to make it to the ocean? David Attenborough narrating in his beautiful British accent. Relationships are kind of like that. Each one starts out with everything necessary to make it to the ocean, scrambling and fighting to get there, but in the end, only a few make it. When you fall in love and commit to whatever form of relationship fits you, you believe you'll make it. But at least half don't make it just going alone by statistics on divorce. If we expand our definition of relationship beyond marriage, breakup rates increase, especially within the first 5 years. Relationships are really hard. Rilke said, "For one human being to love another, that is perhaps the most difficult of all our tasks. The ultimate, the last test and proof, the work for which all other work is but preparation." When I met Dwayne in 1996, I was struggling. My life looked good. I'd completed my master's degree in psychology. I was married. I had a young daughter. I had everything I thought would make me happy, but I wasn't happy. It didn't make sense to me. I was lost, anxious, depressed, and feeling really alone in my struggle. I went to a lecture on relationships given by that guy up there. There he was on the stage talking about connection, feelings, love, and meaning. Everything inside of me lit up like fireworks. I went up to introduce myself after that talk. And if I had been honest about what was happening inside of me, I would have said this: "My life is in the toilet. Nothing makes sense anymore. I am so lost and messed up. But you made sense to me, Dwayne. In fact, this is the first time I have felt hopeful in nearly 2 years. I want to know more about you." That's not what I said. That's not what I said. My knee-jerk instinct was to hide that hot mess. And I did. Connection is only experienced when you're vulnerable and real. But we rarely start out, even in the beginning, fully real. We put our best foot forward and hide the rest. Now, I'm not suggesting you blurt out your worst fears or your most traumatic experience on the first date. But at some point, you have to give the other person the chance to fall in love with your imperfections. Problems begin when we choose to protect ourselves instead of doing that. So Dwayne and I came together. We met, the sparks sizzled. We came together, we came together, we came together, and then boom. Like all couples, we hit a wall where all of a sudden things got difficult. We weren't aware of this at the time, but things are difficult there because we're about to enter unknown territory, intimate territory in here. Our defenses at that wall dance together in a painful reinforcing pattern. I worked overtime on our relationship, trying hard, doing more. Eventually, I'd get disappointed. I didn't get dramatic about that because that's not my style. But I made my disappointment clear. I was cold. I would point out Dwayne's faults in a very moderate tone of voice. The more I pointed out how little Dwayne was putting into the relationship, the less he put in. The less he put in, the more I pointed it out. Dwayne did not use a moderate tone of voice. That is not Dwayne's style. He'd say, "If you were nicer, I'd put more into the relationship." I'd say, "Well, if you'd put more into the relationship, maybe I'd be nicer." I'm guessing you can relate to being caught up in this kind of really painful pattern. This is how it played out between Dwayne and I, and how it plays out between partners varies. How it plays out or has played out for you will be different, but the pattern is the same. It becomes this predictable dance between you. They do this and you do that. You end up hurting and hurting each other profoundly in that process. The function of this dysfunction is to sustain a distance. You are stuck at the level of intimacy you're familiar with. Your defenses dance with the other's defenses, and it keeps you apart. This is where you start questioning the relationship, wondering if you picked the right person. I'm not going to ask you to put your hand up if you've been in that spot, because if your partner is sitting right beside you now, they could have an anxiety attack, and we're not going to do that to them. But I am guessing that you have been there at least once in your life where you're questioning whether you picked the right person. Dwayne and I are often asked by people in this stuck place, when do I leave my relationship? Our response is after you've shown up in it. When you're in this kind of pattern, you're defended. Those defenses aren't you. They're not you. You are the one under the armor. Reaching that painful point in your relationship can be the beginning instead of the end. It can become an upward spiral instead of a painful repeating pattern. This stuck place is a natural, normal developmental stage in a relationship. It's a choice point. Be real or strategic. Be vulnerable or defended. You can learn to fully show up, which means being real, vulnerable, and undefended in the very place you want to armor up. So what's really happening here? Your loved one is poking at a painful place inside of you, which is why you want to armor up and defend. That painful place has a history that started before they entered your life. And here's the weird twist in all of this. Love is part of the trigger. When you love someone, they become important. It activates your whole emotional history, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is the blessing and the curse of love. Love is an evolutionary trigger. It opens things up that can be really painful. And there's profound opportunity in that to grow individually and together. To understand the depth of what's happening here, we have to go to the beginning of our human story. Love is literally the foundation on which we begin our lives. Our emotional network, which operates through our cortex and limbic system, gets established in the first 6 months or so after birth. This is part of the bonding process with our caregivers. Those of you who are parents know what that feels like from the parent end. It's so powerful. We're wired to feel love and connection before we're wired to think. Such a beautiful aspect of being human, that we're wired for love and connection first as our foundation. Personally, I believe that has a spiritual reason for being, as well as an evolutionary or survival-based reason. So we operate from our emotions all through our childhoods. And as much as we might argue the point, emotions continue to be the main driver for adults as well. Our thinking brain, our neocortex, starts to kick in at around age 5. There's usually, you got a hint about when this has started for you when you have a sequential memory, right? When you first have a memory that's like a little story that has this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. That's an indication that that part of your brain has started to come online. That thinking brain, that neocortex, isn't fully developed until early adulthood. So as children, we're emotional beings driven by connection first and powerfully, and we're thinking beings able to sort out facts and understand nuances second. We become ourselves emotionally and psychologically through the love and support of our caregivers. When we see ourselves being seen, hear ourselves being heard, and feel ourselves being felt. Remember, that's how I defined the experience of love. Mirror neurons in our brains are part of this process. They program us to respond to others, and particularly at this emotional level. So when our inner experience is accurately reflected back to us by another, the people who love us, we become ourselves authentically. When we're recognized in this way, there's a particular true experience that happens inside, and it feels good. Love and connection. We're wired for love and connection, and it's how we become ourselves. So I'm going to show you a clip about mirror neurons at work. I'm going to show you a little video from an experiment that a guy named Ed Tronick, who's one of the big names in attachment theory, did. And this clip shows the impact of disconnection on just a little tiny infant.
In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
Oh, my good girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
Yeah. So before you get all freaked out about how much you've screwed up your kids, I really want to emphasize the importance of repair. When mom came back to her daughter at the end of that clip, healthy attachment is a really messy process. And it's a process of disconnecting, then coming back and repairing. And that disconnecting, coming back and repairing is actually an important part of forming a strong bond. One of the big attachment parenting guys named Gordon Neufeld says parents need to get this right about 30% of the time to grow a healthy child, right? So that's not a huge bar to hit. 30% of the time we can do that. On an important side note, that still face that you see there is also associated with trauma in adults. People who have that lack of facial expression are often people who've been in situations where it was dangerous to be read in that kind of nonverbal way. And adults experience the same kind of distress in response to still face. It is the cause, actually, of many arguments between couples, in my experience. Connection is seeing yourself being seen, hearing yourself being heard, and feeling yourself being felt. Reading body language and facial expression cues is part of that, right? So it makes sense. So the bad stuff happens when there's no repair. When there's no repair, our emotional wiring gets impacted in some really significant ways. I'm just going to go back and share my PowerPoint again. And I have to go back to my slide. So you're little, something scary or traumatic happens. It could be something like being abused or yelled at repeatedly. It could be something a lot more subtle, like when some part of you isn't approved of. You don't understand what's happening because your brain can't make sense of it yet. You instinctively know you need to be connected to survive. So you're terrified at the threat of rejection. If you have somewhere to go with this terror and are comforted, then it's all good, just like in the clip that we just watched. If you don't have somewhere to go, the problem starts. If you have nowhere to bring your terror and be comforted, it turns into shame. You're flooded with fear. You have nowhere to go, and you think, oh no, what have I done? What's wrong with me? You believe what happened must be your fault. You turn your fear against yourself and feel this terrible shame. The feelings are really intense, so you push them down and away. You develop what we metaphorically refer to as a basement, a place in your psyche and your being where you lock part of you away, believing that you're bad and wrong and feeling that you're bad and wrong. This can happen in moments of obvious trauma, or it can happen in subtle, repeated moments. It's the disconnection with no repair that's damaging, not necessarily the severity of the event. Small, repeated disconnections can have really painful results. So I can share examples of both from my personal life, repeated moments of disconnection, as well as something that most of us would recognize as a traumatic event. As a kid, I often found myself outside of my friend group. I'd make my way in and then would do something and would be kicked out again. I did have one best friend throughout much of my childhood. And I was at my best friend's house one night for a sleepover. I was in the top bunk of her bunk bed. She was in the bottom bunk. And I woke up in the middle of the night and opened my eyes and saw a shadow. There was a light from the hallway. I saw a shadow, and one of her older brothers was standing over the bed. So I see this shadow and I hear breathing. When we're children and scared, all of us as humans instinctively either fight, flee, or freeze. Children most often freeze. And that's what I did. I was just really still. I pretended that I was asleep. He then proceeded to sexually molest me, and the whole time I just pretended that I was asleep. I don't remember much aside from him leaving the room. I don't remember getting back to sleep. The next thing that I actually remember is walking home with my friend the next day, and I told her what had happened. And she told me right away, don't tell your parents. My brother will get into so much trouble. Now, here's the thing. She had 2 older brothers. I was about 8, 9 at the time. One of the brothers, the younger of the older 2, would have been somewhere around 12, 13. The other one would have been a few years older than that. She started asking me all kinds of questions about which brother it was, and I did not get a good look at him. Eventually, she asked me the question, was he big or little? And I said he was big, because to me he was. The next time that I was over at my friend's house, I learned that the oldest brother got kicked out of the house. She'd gone and told her parents. I hadn't told mine. She went home and told her parents, and the oldest brother got kicked out of the house. The younger brother walked into the room as I was visiting my friend, and I realized he was wearing the exact same shirt that he'd been wearing the night that I was molested, and so it was the younger brother. I made a mistake. And I remember the horror. I tell this story a lot, and every single time I tell it, this moment gets me. The horror of that moment. I made this terrible mistake and identified the wrong brother. And I never did talk to my parents about it, and I never told her either, because I was scared of losing my only friend. So again, nowhere to go with these really painful, intense feelings that a child would not be able to process, right? We learn to separate thinking from feeling in these traumatic moments because the feeling is so painful. It's the feeling we put into the basement, locked away and hidden. Over time, we develop a defense system. I show myself, I'm rejected by my peers. I feel ashamed, and then I try all kinds of different behaviors to win them over. Eventually, I get one that works. I learned to work overtime to get people to like me. I learned to sacrifice myself in the process. I learned mistakes are horrible, so I am not going to make them. I became a perfectionist. We all do this. We learn all kinds of defenses over time according to what appears to work. Dwayne grew up with an alcoholic father who got violent when drunk. He was the only son and often protected his mothers and sisters. The scenes that happened at his home would wake up the neighborhood. Police got called. Home was not a safe place for him. He left, and he learned to keep leaving. I work overtime. Dwayne avoids. You have your own unique learned, hide, pretend, and defend strategies. This is what's lurking at the root of the painful patterns that we get ourselves into. When someone gets close and wants to know all of you, they're knocking on the door to your basement. How close can you let someone come? The more you have locked in your basement, the further it will feel like you need to keep others from it. Your defenses will kick in. This isn't your fault because it all began before you had a choice. However, at some point in our adult lives, we can decide to do something different to experience a different result. Intimacy isn't magic, it's a choice. One day, in the middle of our painful dance, Dwayne said, as he often did, "You know, Kath, maybe this isn't working out." Ouch. That's what normally kicked me working overtime. Instead of kicking into working overtime, I stopped. I took a good look around inside of me all the way down to my basement. What I discovered appalled me and freed me. I realized that I'd been confusing being needed with being wanted. I had worked overtime my entire life to make people need me, making myself necessary. I did this thinking I would feel loved. This was driven by the fear that I'm not enough as I am, just me. This was hiding in my basement, driving my part of our pattern dance. My friends, I have some news for you. Being needed is not the same as being wanted. In order to feel loved and wanted, I have to let the other person choose me. I can't try to manipulate that choice by making myself needed. Crap, right? Crap. I know my people are out there. I know some of you are feeling that with me. Crap, what do you mean? I work hard. I also realized that I was withholding the most potent ingredient of all, which is my love. That was my part of the violent part of our destructive pattern, withholding my love, withholding until he says he's sorry. I don't want him to have power. If I tell him I love him, especially in the middle of a fight, I feel vulnerable, right? I'm guessing some of you have done that. Withhold your love until you perceive the issue to be resolved. I'm not going to say I love you until you say you're sorry. Intimacy isn't magic, it's a choice to show up. That includes the choice to give your love. I decided to show up by showing my love instead of hiding it. I sat Dwayne down, I held his hand, and I said, "I really love you. I want this relationship to work, and I want you. And the next time you say to me that you don't think this relationship is working, I will believe you." That was a really vulnerable and brave step to take in the middle of that situation. Just to give myself a little credit. Love can trigger an evolutionary upward spiral if you put it into the mix first. Human beings are pack animals, and as such, we're wired to find safety and connection. When we feel safe, we focus, we process information better, we engage with others, and we are at our best. We connect through emotions. We've evolved as a species, not just because we need each other for survival. We've evolved because of our need to care and be cared for. We have the capacity for profound sentimentality and love. We form societies not because it takes communal effort to provide shelter and weather the storms together, not only because of that, but also to experience something beyond all of that, love. Love is the first ingredient to put into the mix in a potentially difficult conversation. Putting love into the mix gives the other person a reason to listen to you. It relaxes our nervous system, taking it out of fight and flight mode. That relaxation into the safety of connection allows for deeper reflection. Your gaze can turn inward instead of outward, looking for danger. Following that statement by me, Dwayne's gaze turned inward for 2 days. 2 days. No response to my brave statement except for polite interaction. 2 days. But I hung on. I wanted to give him the chance to choose me and choose our relationship because I wanted to feel wanted. That was a step upward in my own personal evolution. I left the choice with him because I was no longer willing to settle for being needed. Until the moment of horror, I didn't know that I was trying to make him need me so that he couldn't reject me. But after seeing that in myself, I could not unsee it. I couldn't go back. So I moved into unknown territory, right? I moved into unknown territory. I wanted to know what it felt like to be wanted and chosen. After 2 days, Dwayne came back to me and said this: Catherine, every time you ask me to come closer, it's like I have to visit the home I came from first. I've been punishing you now for what happened to me back then. That isn't fair. I'm sorry. I'm so scared of what you'll find if you look too close. I get scared that I'm a failure, like my dad. I run, hide, and blame you. But you're not the problem. I have a problem and I'm finally owning it. I love you. I want this relationship and I want to be in this relationship with you. It was so apparent to me when Dwayne showed his vulnerability that he was anything but a failure. The person emerging from the basement was brave, beautiful, imperfect, and real. There was nothing inside of me at that moment but love for him. The choice to show up and show it all created a magical experience. Connection, love. That moment was electric. That moment has become the foundation for our relationship. I'm known and loved. He is known and loved. We continue to grow together and become more alive, even in our old age. Connection is the correction for those crazy things we've made up about ourselves in the basement. The aspect of self you sentenced to the basement has been suffering in isolation. Intimacy is a decision, a brave decision to be emotionally naked with the person you love. When you reveal your fears and experience that feeling inside of yourself, it changes how you feel about yourself. The feeling of connection pulls us out of the basement and back into life. And the more you in your life, the more alive you will feel. That's what's possible for your relationship. A painful cycle can become an upward spiral. We become more of who we actually are. Relationships promote mutual evolution. Our partners knock on the door to the basement, and we have the choice to defend and keep the door locked or emerge naked and vulnerable. The process becomes a lot easier once you learn that you're returning to love. So, when do you leave a relationship? After you've shown up in it and given it a chance. Showing up isn't a guarantee, but being defended is pretty much a guarantee that things will stay the same. Sometimes our defenses become so automatic that we're not aware of the vulnerability they're meant to protect. In that case, you might need professional help to slow down, move through your uncomfortable feelings, and make contact with what's being triggered in your basement. And this is where Clear Mind excels. Our awakening workshop is all about creating enough safety for you to be able to turn your gaze inward. We help you make contact with the one you locked away and break free of those painful limiting beliefs. It's an uncomfortable process. I will not lie to you, but so worth it on the other side. The thing about feelings is that you can't selectively numb. You can't say, I want to feel alive, joyful, passionate, loving, but I never want to feel angry. I never want to feel scared or vulnerable. Consider for a moment the physical experience of fear and excitement in your body. Aren't they really similar? That's because it's the same network being activated for those feelings, those emotions. When we have support to open up those uncomfortable feelings, they can transform into what they want to be on the positive end of the emotional spectrum. It's a magical experience. So it's painful en route, yes, but the destination is magical when you arrive. And here's the thing you can do right now. Don't withhold. Be brave with your love. Start your ongoing courageous conversation with, I love you. You are important to me. I want this relationship to work. True intimacy isn't magic, it's a choice. A choice to show up, to give all of yourself to the relationship, including and most importantly, your love. The more you legitimately know someone, the more you fall in love with them. The process of making meaning of our relationships and our world is a lifelong interactional process that happens in connection with other human beings. No connection between individuals is perfect, yet out of all of this imperfection, love can find its way, triggering an upward evolutionary spiral. Knowing someone requires giving them your loving attention and practicing curiosity. Being curious about another with that kind of soft, loving attention will turn perception towards appreciation and love. When others experience you wanting to accurately see, hear, and feel them, they feel safe to be vulnerable. Loving attention invites the other to reveal, to be vulnerable, and it's so easy to love people there in their vulnerability. Being known requires the courage to be vulnerable. Letting another person see aspects of ourselves we've hidden in the basement, it's really scary at first. But once you come out of hiding, it's incredibly freeing. Love is experienced when you can see yourself being seen, Hear yourself being heard and feel yourself being felt. Love is holding another accurately in your heart and mind, and our lives do depend on it.